Welcome to the Butterfly Farm. My name is Tony. Actually what we're going to do today is I'm going to take you through the short but spectacular lives of butterflies. I'm going to begin with the eggs actually, as soon as we're ready on that one. During this little talk, I'm going to take you through all the different life stages, from egg to caterpillar to chrysalis to butterfly. We'll look at metamorphosis as well. And after that we'll spend a bit of time in the garden actually seeing what these little creatures are up to. They're very hard to train, by the way, but they do know who loves them. Oligo Urolacus, so-called owl butterfly. I'm holding up a little piece of a banana leaf with an egg on it. I can see a large 10-day-old caterpillar here, like this, that is eventually going to become this butterfly resting here on my neck. I'm going to begin by saying that butterflies have short, remarkable lives. The average lifespan for a butterfly might be anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks, as an adult, as the butterfly itself. Happily though, when we talk about butterflies, we're talking about what might arguably be the most successful, or certainly one of the most successful animals in the history of the planet. Here's why I say that. There are roughly 170,000 different species of moths and butterflies on Earth. If you take beetles out of the picture, there are more butterfly species than all the plants and animals on the Earth put together and multiplied by 4. In other words, very diverse. They trace back to the beginning of the Cretaceous period, so 140 plus million years of survival on the planet. During which time, if you think about it, all that diversity has led to incredible differences between species. So when I say that most butterflies live 2-3 weeks, that doesn't mean all butterflies live 2 or 3 weeks. You have little butterflies from the Puridae family, cabbage whites and sulfurs and so on, that might live only 24 hours as an adult butterfly. And then you'll have little butterflies from the Heliconius family, the so-called long-winged butterflies. I'll point some out to you when they fly into the picture. That might live up to 9 months in ideal conditions. 1 day and 9 months is a pretty big difference. And this kind of holds true for a lot of the aspects of a butterfly's life. So a couple of things that have happened so far. The egg when first laid was a kind of pale yellowy color. It is darkening right now as the caterpillar forms inside. In what looks to me about 2-3 days, the caterpillar is going to chew a little hole through that egg and it's going to crawl out. It's virtually microscopic at that point. Okay, at the egg stage, ants, birds, frogs, toads, lizards, bats, everything eats them. Ants, spiders in particular might take 95 out of every 100 eggs. That would be fairly typical in nature. The life of a butterfly is a constant test of extreme challenges, really. Most caterpillars are nocturnal and eat at night, in other words. Typically 8, 10, 12 hours a night without pause. The equivalent for us as human beings would be picking up a knife and fork for breakfast and keeping that knife and fork in motion and steadily delivering food through right until after dinner. If we were capable of eating like that, 2 things would happen. 1, we would grow at some extraordinary rate, and 2, we would probably explode. Caterpillars do both of those things. In fact, even the slowest growing caterpillar is going to have an exponential growth rate. In other words, it will double in size or so every day. Here's a 2-day-old caterpillar from that same egg. Very well camouflaged, as you can see here along the banana leaf. Here's this caterpillar 1 week later. Can you see the difference in size? Extraordinary. When you look at this animal here, you're essentially looking at a kind of cylindrical being. And I'll be kind of blunt about it. There's a hole at one end, the mouth, and a hole at the other end. A tremendous amount of food goes in that front end, and comparatively little comes out. Caterpillar poop is called frass, by the way. The caterpillar is born already with somewhere between 4 and 7 layers of skin, for this particular species 4. After a day or 2 of eating, this particular caterpillar typically doesn't eat a lot during the day, eats only at night. Some caterpillars will eat pretty close to 24/7. But after a day or so, the caterpillar is now grown, it might be even several hundred times its initial size, and it's going to explode out of that outermost layer of skin. It would be like overinflating a balloon or something until it pops. So the outermost layer of skin splits open and the caterpillar essentially crawls out of its own skin. The next layer of skin is elastic and can stretch to accommodate more eating. You see, the growth rate is almost inconceivable. If you believe in a designer, designed to eat and grow. Everything about them is organized around food, eating, and growth. You can see that a caterpillar doesn't see particularly well, unlike a butterfly, which has probably the most complex vision of any living thing. Caterpillars do have 6 eyes, 3 pairs, that function very much like ours. A single point of focus, a bit of peripheral, so unless they can turn, they can't really see anything to the side very well. That's how caterpillars do. All 6 of those eyes are organized right along the jawline. So if you stop and think about it, a caterpillar is pretty much looking at the food in front of its face for its lifetime as a caterpillar. If you could look over the entire globe at any particular instant and not detect a single butterfly, take a look at your watch tape, take a deep breath. This is probably about as long as you've got. Butterflies have become essentially the canary in the coal mine and a real, like the litmus test for the health of the planet. If there were no butterflies on this planet Earth, life as we currently know it would come to a screeching halt. This is an incontrovertible truth. If caterpillars had no defenses, we're in deep, deep trouble. The planet is in deep, deep trouble. So caterpillars need some protections, otherwise they wouldn't have survived the 145 million years that they've been on the planet. You see how well camouflaged it is. Sometimes they'll even align themselves so the little dots in them will align up with some of the dots on the underside of the banana leaf, where oftentimes you'll find little bits of yellowing. He's hard to pick up at first, very well camouflaged. If anything does see him, he is, of course, very, very edible thing. Probably sometime later today is going to shed that skin. It's going to be its first molt, and it'll start its second growth period, called an instar, by the way. During that second instar, it's going to grow much larger. It's going to stay along this leaf. It's going to darken a little bit, and it's going to start to spend more of its time on the darker parts of the green leaf, again, relying on camouflage. Somewhere 75–80% of butterflies depend on camouflage to protect them. Best not to be seen when you're an animal really incapable of a lot of aggressive defense. In this case, imitation or mimicry, wherein an animal tries to resemble something that it's not or look like something it isn't. In this case, let's look at the animal. You've got this big apparent head here. This is not its true head. This is like a Halloween mask. Underneath this caterpillar is quite susceptible to our bacteria and viruses, so I'm not going to touch it very much. But underneath this mask is the real head, quite harmless and not ominous in any way. This is just meant to possibly threaten a potential predator, look like a big fierce animal when you're not. You can see these spines along the back of the caterpillar. Again, would make this animal look like this could be unpleasant to try to bite into or painful or whatever. Well, these spines are soft and rubbery. Like this, they're harmless, but they give the effect of something that might be more lethal. Insects with tails like this might have a sting there. And if he was wide awake, he would actually lift this up now and a little bit like a rattlesnake and wave it around a bit, making kind of threatening motions with it. It's harmless and it does nothing that can hurt you in any way. But all of those things give this caterpillar that little element of extra element, a chance for survival. They're harmless, but that's what they look like. It gets better. From those 2 glands that resemble a snake's fangs, the caterpillar is able to emit a foul odor, very much like flatulence. So you have an animal that at one point resembles excrement, looks and acts like a snake, smells like excrement, like this. All of these things are deterrents for a would-be predator. Then we do have another type of defense here. And this is actually, we're looking at the caterpillar that brought me into the butterfly world many, many years ago. They don't really resemble another animal or a twig or a stick or anything like that, and they don't look particularly ferocious. You see a small animal, and that small animal is red and black, or yellow and black, or orange and black. Those colors, it's usually referred to as warning coloration, and in nature they signify to a would-be predator that chances are you're not going to really want to mess with me very much. I'm coming now to the part of the talk that's going to probably interfere with your understanding of what life really means. Or it will perhaps expand it. I'm hoping it expands it. This is the hardened subcutaneous layer of the caterpillar, and we call that a chrysalis or pupa. Cocoon if it was a moth, but in this case it's a butterfly. Inside that chrysalis, there's going to be an extraordinary change referred to as metamorphosis, which just means great change, of course, is going to occur. What happens is, some of this has actually begun just before pupation, but the caterpillar is starting to melt down. Tissues and so on are starting to melt down. The caterpillar turns pretty much into a soup of genetic material. Think like a DNA stew. At this point, there's no real head, there's no brain, no nervous system to speak of. This is genetic gunk, no heart, no organs don't function perfectly. At this point, are we still talking about an animal? Are we talking about a life form? our conventional understanding of life would say, no, this is not alive. It's not doing any of the things of a living thing at this point. From that genetic gush, after some number of days, weeks, months, in some cases even up to a year for certain species and certain conditions, temperatures and so on play a big factor, have a big role to play in this. From that genetic muck starts to form the head, the thorax, abdomen, wings, legs of a butterfly. The butterfly is not really a caterpillar that grew wings. It's an entirely new animal that has practically nothing in common with its predecessor, the caterpillar. Not even really the same genetic activity. You go from a genderless eating machine to a highly procreative animal that doesn't even have a mouth. I mean, these are two very different animals. You are more like my puppy dog Miles Davis than a caterpillar is like a butterfly. You have the same bones, the same muscles, the same structures, the same systemic activities, more or less the same type of vision, and really about 90+% of the same DNA as a dog. We all do. None of these things are true for a butterfly and a caterpillar. If you're following what I've said here though, when you go from this change from caterpillar to butterfly, you start out as one animal, the caterpillar. You stop being a viable animal, and then you reform into an animal far more different than a dog and a human being. It's an extraordinary change process that we don't fully understand. We've been able to CAT scan chrysalis for 30 odd years or so on, but because we haven't fully unraveled butterfly DNA yet, we don't know a lot about the triggering mechanism and how this really works. So there's an essential mystery still at the base of this whole change process. Doesn't this little male appear to be too big to fit inside that small pupal case? The females tend to be bigger and stronger and do essentially all of the work. The males are drunken ne'er-do-wells who essentially party their brains out. The biggest body part on a butterfly, you can see right here, is the abdomen. In this case, the male's abdomen is shaped a little bit like my finger. It's long and slender. There's two little clasping devices at the end that are retracted right now, but you can see the biggest body part really isn't very big. Butterflies have 6 legs, okay? Now, all insects do. You can see here, he's got one pair that's retracted and smaller, but he's got a very good grip. It feels kind of like Velcro on it. But if you look at his legs, these can be all folded up to take very little space inside that same chrysalis, as you can see right here. See, and then he can stretch right as he wants to. Right now, by the way, he's using his feet to smell and taste my fingers. Butterflies don't have a mouth. They have what's called a proboscis. I mean, I can see just the beginnings of this one here. The proboscis for this species is longer than its legs, actually, but it's got it all curled up. It's and retracted into its head, so it's not taking up any room in the chrysalis either. But when extended, he would be able to touch my finger with it. Right? It'd be a little bit like if I had a tongue so long that I could drop it down and lick between my toes without bending over. Horrible thought, of course, but and then retract it and put it up into my head. Butterflies, the vast majority of butterflies, as opposed to moths, have capitate antennas. These long, slender smelling devices look a little bit like a golf club, actually, like this. And with these, they are able to smell things for, 5, 6, 7, 8 kilometers away, like that. Track pheromones through the air and so on and so forth. But again, not taking up much room inside the chrysalis. Butterflies, like all flying insects, have 4 wings. The big forewing here, and then the smaller hind wing here. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. The smallest wing here is the hind wing, which is, as you can see, about this big. But when this butterfly first came out, which was just earlier today actually, that hind wing was about the size of my baby fingernail. I don't cultivate long nails, I'm a gardener. So they were tiny. They weren't all folded or shrunken or anything, they were just small at the time. If this was the female, she'd be 1.5 times the size, almost double the weight. The abdomen would be shaped much more like my thumb than my finger, like the rest of my fingers, like this, because she's full of eggs. This particular species would have about 150 unfertilized eggs, which is a small number. Most butterfly species, 300, 400, 500 would be typical, and some species have a couple of thousand. If I've described a caterpillar as sort of nature's equivalent of a chocolate bar with feet, a butterfly is really just a conspicuous piece of flying food. And if it can't fly, and it can't right after emergence, it's just food. So they've got to work quickly to become airborne. Using that powerful heart, they propel blood through the veins in the wings. You can see these lines in the wings here. These are the veins like we have. Using the propulsion of blood to stretch out the wing membrane while it's still elastic, they stretch out and enlarge the wings to their full size. Very cool blood though. The little tiny bit of blood that stays in these veins hardens, usually very quickly. And now these veins are no longer serving as blood vessels really. What are they? Strong, hollow, rigid tubes, the structure for the wings. This is a boneless animal, not a bird or a bat. This is the framework for the wings, like you would have a framework for a kite, or the monoplanes and biplanes of World War I, for example, like this where you're stretching canvas over frame. This is the framework for the wing. Now you're ready for flight. Now if this was the big female, this is the little male. Her first flight, she's going to go off and look for her host plant. In this case, the banana plant. Remember, she's able to detect it using her antenna for smelling things far away from long distances. She would find that host plant, she would probably land on it, and using those sensory devices, olfactory and gustatory senses in the bottoms of their feet, she's going to taste the plant, verify that it's healthy and so on, and then and only then is she really going to be interested in finding a mate. Remember, all those eggs in the abdomen are unfertilized. Okay? So she's going to go looking out for a male. At this point, you're probably going to realize that the life of males and females in the butterfly world is dramatically different. That male butterfly, just born earlier today, emerged from the chrysalis just like the female did, expanded his forewings just like the female did. His first flight, he is not off looking for host plants. He's not worried in any way about the future of the species, subsequent generations, world peace, anything like that. He's going to look for the nearest bar. Here we go. Which is going to look just like this. This is, by the way, your blue morpho. That's not really blue, which came from a chrysalis, just like this. You see, again, you see how much bigger the butterfly, this is again a small male, how much bigger the butterfly seems to be, and how it would look unlikely to fit inside this comparatively small chrysalis. I don't know if you saw that chrysalis, it moved on its own. There's a hinge here, and that means this butterfly is coming out fairly soon. This pupal case is going to become translucent in the next 24 hours, and the butterfly is going to come out probably tomorrow morning. So here's your male butterfly. First day of his life, he flies over to this. Now, this is a fairly inebriated blue morpho there. He was pretty sluggish even getting away. He didn't know he was safe from me. The vast majority of butterflies live in tropical rainforests, perhaps 80–85% of all the butterflies on the planet. If you've ever been in a rainforest, you'll know that it's dark in there. So you're not going to have a lot of flowering plants. You will find, though, that certain plants, bananas, for example, which tend to grow better uncultivated than cultivated, guava and so on, flourish in rainforests. So let's take the fruit, the banana in this case. It's going to fall to the ground like this. It's going to start to rot, and as it rots, remember that's a fermentation process, it's going to start to produce ethanol, somewhere between 3 and 5% level of ethanol, and that's when the butterfly becomes really interested in it. Same thing for the nectar feeders. Okay? Let's look at this lantana here, a multifluoridated nectar source for a lot of butterflies that depend primarily on nectar. Well, nectar is sugar water. It's going to collect down here in the cup of the flower, and in direct sunlight, like we're seeing right now, that nectar is going to start to ferment, just like you see over here, like this, and that's when the butterfly, in this case one of the long-winged butterflies from the Heliconius family that can live up to 9 months. This is likely the end, really, of the evolutionary line. He's going to stick his proboscis into the rotten fruit of this case, or into these florets full of fermented nectar, and he's going to start to drink. If I was going to replicate a male butterfly's daily diet, I would need to drink a couple of cases of beer. The butterfly is going to become inebriated, and after that, he's going to do a reckless, heroic, and extraordinarily foolish thing. That male butterfly is going to leave the comparative safety of shade, say afforded by this longleaf ficus tree, and the safety of being near to plants and so on, like this, and he's going to look for a clearing in the rainforest like this, where he could get some sunlight on it. If he had some high ground, like a rock promontory, get up on that like a stage. And then he's going to start dancing his drunken little heart out. He's trying to attract the female. Okay? Unfortunately for this would-be suitor, he's attracting all the predators, the birds, the frogs, the toads, the lizards, the bats, all the things that eat him. In some species, 4 out of every 5 males are eaten on the first day of their life. A very high-risk exercise, if you want to put it. Remember the caterpillar that was going to look like bird food? This is the butterfly that caterpillar eventually becomes. More like my thumb, full of unfertilized eggs. And for this species, several hundred. Okay? They're already mating, so this little fellow's out of luck. So he's going to attach himself on with those little claspers, the little clasping devices at the end of the abdomen. And then they're going to mate. They're very prolific at this. They have the same equipment that we do. In some cases, the male and female might mate for up to 48 hours without pause. The males of some species ejaculate the entire 48 hours. Either way, they're going to leave a big, what's called a spermophore or spermatophore, but spermophore, a big ball of sperm inside the female abdomen. That's for most females in the butterfly world, the vast majority, that's her first and last time mating. She will spend the rest of her life laying eggs. She'll lay a few more eggs there, fly a kilometer off somewhere else to find another banana plant. She spends the vast majority of her active life ovipositing, laying eggs, and in a very careful and very specific way. And this really, really is a big determinant in their longevity on the planet, of course. She will stop and pause at the nearest bar as she's passing by and maybe have a quick drink, sort of an energy burst, and go back to that egg laying, the life of the female butterfly. So he's been on the planet a couple of days. Here's what he's accomplished so far. He essentially got drunk, went dancing, and found a girlfriend. They've mated for up to 2 days, like this, and after that he's going to have his first real night of sleep. By the way, during that mating process, the female, big enough, strong enough, and wary enough that if she senses danger, an oncoming bird or something like that, she's capable of flight with the male attached. And pardon me if I'm looking at this from the male perspective, but at this point it may not all be completely fun and frivolous good times. Here's what he does to assist in the process of escape. Nothing. He's hanging upside down. He's facing backwards. His wings are folded. He is essentially lunch hanging out the back, hoping that the female he's attached to is able to fly him to safety. The mating process is concluded successfully. The female spends essentially the rest of her life laying eggs during the daytime. Butterflies are a diurnal animal. Remember, the caterpillars for the most part are nocturnal. The male has his night sleep. He's going to get up bright and early the next morning. What's he going to do? He's going to head back to the pub. He's going to head out to the dance floor after that. He's going to go looking for another mate. This is a procreative engine, really. A high-risk lifestyle. Remember, he's attracting the attention of all the predators and so on and so forth. But this is basically the mission in life for the male butterfly. As they go collecting the nectar, little bits of pollen attached to the proboscis, the tips of the wings, their feet, and so on like this. And this is how pollen gets transported. This is mating for flowers, flowering plants, the transportation of the gametes, really, like that. So they inadvertently move it as they go about looking for nectar. They cross-pollinate the plants and are contributed to somewhere between 40 and 50% of the spread of flowering plants on the earth, as did bees. Where butterflies have become critical for the health of the planet right now is, as just about everyone knows right now, bee populations in many parts of the world are in dire straits. In some cases they've shrunk down to 5–10% of former levels. A number of different problems besetting them, from hyperparasite, a microscopic mite, basically, think like a miniature spider, that the only real cure is to exterminate all of the infected bees and start over. There's also a virus that's affected bees, often referred to as colony collapse, because that ends up being the result. It's a virus that's contracted by bees and from which they develop a syndrome, so a set of behaviors. That set of behaviors is a crude analogy, is something like autism is for human beings. I worked for 6 years with autistic children, many of whom were capable of doing extraordinary things. One of the things that was really a long shot for them was the ability to work in a large group in a cooperative manner. This is practically the feature of the problem. And this is what colony collapse is for bees. The bees don't want to associate with one another. They all fly off in different directions and don't function. And if you know how bees work, they need a colony to do what bees do. Butterflies are, of course, more whimsical in their approach to things, and in some ways more like human beings. They make an annual migration from, let's say, Canada, crossing the U.S., 7 main travel routes all the way to central Mexico and Michoacan. An extraordinary flight of, maybe 5,000 kilometers for many of them. For a small animal that weighs about half a gram and never eats anything in its adult life, it's an extraordinary achievement. But in the last 150 years, they've done more than that. They have flown across virtually all the major oceans on the planet, using thermals, of course, but perhaps the only animal in the history of this earth to fly across an ocean with no food, no rest, and no water. They're incapable of swimming, and they don't catch fish like terns and albatrosses. Extraordinary migration. What was going to happen when you commingled these butterflies that really were not used to being around one another? And one of the things that was astonishing and inspiring to me was, you'll come here early morning when the butterflies, remember, they've been sleeping all night, get up and they want to get to nectar sources and so on. And you'll see butterflies sometimes from 4 or 5 different continents here, practically taking turns sticking their proboscis into the flowers, moving aside on occasion to allow others. Their ability to tolerate one another, if you want to jump it up a notch, to respect differences, They don't look like, they don't behave alike, but to tolerate one another, I think greatly surpasses our own. This is Attacus atlas, so-called atlas moth, but a moth that you would find in Southeast Asia, some parts of Northern Africa as well, Ethiopia, places like that. You see that, it's spectacular for the anatomy as well, but you can see the huge big abdomen. She lays the biggest eggs in the lepidopteran world. She was that big, usually in small clusters. As is typical for a lot of moths, they have the furred antenna. They rely much more, of course, on their sense of smell than on their vision. They operate at night. I had one female come out after 13 months in the cocoon, and then you've only got a 5-day window in which to find a male. You know, so there's a lot of hits and misses in their lives, really. But this is a fairly typical butterfly behavior too. Get into trees, shrubs, and hopefully somewhere out of the obvious kind of paths and ways of would-be predators. So, vision of a butterfly is about as complex a visual system as anything on the planet. They have two large eyes. The eye actually is almost the entire side of the head, but each eye comprises perhaps 1,000 separate little eyelets like this, all of them doing different things. Some of them work like a telescope, some of them work more like a microscope, can enlarge small things. They see infrared and ultraviolet with some of them. They have their peripheral vision basically has no boundaries. They see the full 360 at all times. They're able to see all these things and use it to get where they want to go, and detect predators from behind and all kinds of things like this. All the things that give them a better chance of carrying on with life.
I think the most wonderful and fascinating thing about nature is its humor. And if you think about the wings of butterflies and all those thousands and thousands of scales that cover their wings, there's actually a gentleman who's found the entire alphabet and the numbers 1 through 9. Fascinating. I met the couple, Willie and Karen, who are from the UK, in St. Martin, and let's see, went to start working with them, and when they decided to build a farm outside of the hurricane belt, Tony and I were asked to join them and become partners, and here we are. The best observations I've ever heard of about people's experiences at the butterfly farm is one of our students who helped build the mesh containment area came back, and he was sitting on the terrace, and the butterfly farm was finally open, and he got to watch people going into the garden, and then he got to watch them coming out. And he actually described the physical change in their appearance. Their facial expressions were completely calm, peaceful. I would say I'm blessed to have the last 20 years working with the butterflies, the farm, the garden, and the wonderful people that we meet.
For all the disconnect that we have, we're also extraordinarily connected. You know, it's not for nothing that the butterfly effect is called the butterfly effect. We know it through cross-pollination and other things like this, that has extraordinary significance for the planet and for the planet's health. You know, so, and like a lot of seemingly insignificant beings, they're very potent for the well-being of others, and that intrigues me.